Hey there, folks. Welcome back. I am at the NRB in Nashville. I'm sitting down with Mark Meckler. If you know of him, it's perhaps because you're familiar with something called the Convention of States. I've been talking to Rick Santorum about that. Mark Meckler, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
How did you come to this idea of I want to talk about what the Convention of States is, but what is your story about how you came to be a proponent of this idea? Because this is very big stuff. There's no way around it. The idea of a Convention of States is in the Constitution. No one has ever done it in 200 and whatever, 40 years. No one has ever done this. Nobody's even threatened to do it. And you're threatening to do it. You and Rick Santorum and others, I approve of it dramatically, wholeheartedly. I'm excited. But how did you get Mark Meckler, to this point?
I mean, in short version, 11 years ago, I was one of the people to start the Tea Party movement. So in 2010, we get this incredible wave election, the biggest swing Congress since 1938, and they don't do anything. I mean, they literally don't do anything. Nothing changes.
They do jack.
Right. And then we get the Senate.
It's not that they
right?
didn't do anything. It's that they did do jack.
Well, so then you get the Senate. They told us if we just had the Senate and then they don't do jack, or they do jack again.
Yeah.
Right. And then I just thought, well, nothing. It doesn't work. Nothing's working. And that's 8th grade civics, right? If you elect the right people, they'll do what you send them to do. But it doesn't actually work that way. And I had a friend by the name of Mike Ferris came to me. He's really the founder of the homeschool movement in America. Asked me if I was happy with what I'd accomplished in politics. And you would think, having helped to elect the largest swing class in history, I'd be pretty excited. And my answer was, no, I'm frustrated. I'm wasting my life. It's dismal.
It seems to me like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like, so you get these people elected, they go to Washington, but there is something inherently pernicious about Washington, D.C. It does something to people that is not good. And so you're thinking, okay, what is the way out of this mess?
Well, and so what Ferris says to me is, you're approaching the problem incorrectly. You think we have a personnel problem, but we have a structure problem, which is what you're saying. We've built a pernicious structure. So our system of governance has been perverted, especially over the last 100 years, to where it really doesn't matter how many good people, quote unquote, you send to Washington, D.C., you're going to get a bad result. And he said, unless we fix the structure, we're going to continue to get the same result. The only way to fix the structure, use Article 5, call a Convention of States, and propose amendments to restrain federal power. That's how we fix the structure.
So how did you, even before the Tea Party, what was your life leading up to the Tea Party? What were you doing? Because, the Tea Party was a pretty amazing movement.
So I was a practicing attorney. I had a home practice. My specialty was internet advertising law. Believe it or not, I was early on the internet as a lawyer, had figured out what was legal and not legal. I had a very lucrative practice. I was raising my kids. For the most part, I was a stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
And so I was teaching my kids to ride horses. I was coaching 2 soccer teams. Tea Party movement breaks out. And, God threw that in my path and gave me that opportunity. It wasn't something that I sought.
What part of the world did you grow up in, and where did you raise your kids?
I grew up in Los Angeles, California, went to school at San Diego State, law school in Northern California at Jesuit College at McGeorge School of Law.
So how does a Californian get the idea, to think like a conservative? When did that happen for you? Was that growing up, or was that later in life?
No, I grew up that way. Both my parents still alive in their 80s, very conservative values, non-religious household, secular Jews, but very Judeo-Christian orientation in the household.
So you were raised as a secular Jew.
Right.
And here we are at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, loaded with evangelical Christians and patriots. Life is interesting.
Yeah, I'm a radical evangelical Christian at this point. I am a lover of Jesus Christ, and I was 51 years old before I figured it out, before God hit me hard enough across the head with a 2x4.
Well, I got to tell you, the later you come to faith, the more dramatic it is. I was 25, and for me, it was very dramatic. I mean, I've written about it, but it is interesting how now in America, you're seeing so many patriots who maybe wouldn't think of themselves as big people of faith, but they're noticing that the most passionate spokespeople for freedom tend to be evangelical Christians. There's an interesting thing happening in the country.
This is the basis of our system of governance. If you really understand it, it's been cleansed from our history, unfortunately. But if you go back, and I know you've written about this in Republic, If We Can Keep It, these were, for the most part, devout Christian men who understood the theological foundations of freedom.
Right.
And so the nation is based on that.
If You Can Keep It, my book, If You Can Keep It, was when I really discovered all of this. And I always say this, I was embarrassed that I didn't really see this until later in life. And then I had this passion, which I have today, to get this message out to people that this idea of real self-government had never really been tried in the world. It had never been tried in anything comparable to what we did 1776 going forward. It's so beautiful. It's so fragile. And if we don't understand that people gave their lives for this freedom, then we won't be inspired to give our lives for it now. And when I say give our lives, I don't mean literally give our lives, although many have, but it is worth it. It's the most beautiful thing. But most of us growing up, they cease to teach that in certainly in public schools. But it is beautiful. The Convention of States, conventionofstates.com has the information on it. We're going to hold you for another segment. I want to talk more about the Convention of States. Really, it's such an exciting idea. Give us the nutshell version of, if somebody says, what's Convention of States? Tell us what this is. This is an amazing idea.
In Article 5 of the Constitution, there is the methodology for amending the United States Constitution. The first clause says that when 2/3 of both houses of Congress propose amendments, then they go out to the states for ratification. That's how we've gotten all 27 of our amendments. The second clause, which has never been used, says when 2/3 of states want to gather in convention, they pass resolutions, they call for a convention, and then they gather. They do the same thing Congress can do any day, which is they propose amendments to the Constitution. Those amendments then go out for ratification by the states. In our case, we're proposing a convention around 3 ideas. You can talk about anything that would impose term limits on federal officials. And by the way, it's not just Congress. When I say officials, we mean that more broadly. The deep state, as we know it, staffers, bureaucrats, and also the federal judiciary. Second is anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. That would include a balanced budget amendment. It would include tax and spending caps, imposing generally accepted accounting principles on the federal government. And then finally, anything that would impose scope and jurisdiction restraints on the federal government. The fundamental problem we have is the federal government has reached beyond the bounds of the enumerated powers, and we need to grab them by the neck and stuff them back in the box.
Well, there you go. And so conventionofstates.com is where people can find it. And how can people get involved in this? In other words, I know that Senator Rick Santorum was telling me that 19 states already have approved this, and you need what, 34?
34 is the total needed. Yeah, that's correct.
So what happens? The legislatures make the decision that we're in, and you are now trying to reach out to these legislators around the country to get them to do this?
Yeah, that's correct. The technical process is that a legislature, both houses have to introduce the resolution. They generally have to pass it by simple majority. No governor's signature is required because it's not legislation, it's a resolution. And really the most important part is the grassroots. You asked, how do people get involved? Well, they go to conventionofstates.com, they sign up. That'll send a petition to their legislator.
Right.
If they really want to get involved, which they should, they click on the Take Action tab and they volunteer. We've got all kinds of positions and training, and it's really learning how to be involved in your state legislature and influence your state legislators.
Well, it is so beautiful to me that, first of all, the founders, the men who wrote this Constitution, put in this genius idea that's been hiding in plain sight, Article 5, for all of these decades, centuries, and suddenly now you think, you know what? I'm glad that's there because I don't see any way out of this mess. We need the states to step up and to say to Washington, enough is enough. We, the people, via the states, are going to do something about this. So it really is kind of amazing, and it's undeniably, as far as I'm concerned, historic.
You know, as a student of history, you'll appreciate how that actually got in the Constitution. September 15, 1787, 2 days before the Constitution signed, 2 days before the end of convention, Colonel George Mason from Virginia stands up. He says, we got a problem with the document. We have given the power to Congress to propose amendments, but we didn't give the same power to the people acting through the states. Madison's notes reflect he asked a question. He said, are we so naive that we believe that anybody in a tyranny, Congress, the federal government, would ever propose amendments to restrain their own tyranny? And so he proposes that we need to give the states this right. Eldridge Gary actually proposes the language. Amazingly, Madison's notes reflect two Latin abbreviations, nin com, no comment. There's no debate.
Is that where we get the phrase nincompoop?
I think that's the precursor.
Actually, I think no, but I think there's a relation. But so Madison writes no comment. Why?
Because there's no debate. In other words, not one person says, "Oh, wait, Colonel Mason, that's a terrible idea. What are you thinking?" It's the only thing I'm aware of. No debate, and then it's unanimously adopted into the Constitution.
So they kind of recognize this is important. Yesterday, I think I came up with the idea, but I heard Rick Santorum say it in his speech, that this is kind of like the in emergency break glass, pull this lever. That's kind of where we are, right? We're like, you look around, you're like, okay, it's time. We got to break the glass. We got to pull the lever, and we have to enact this process, the Convention of States, to gather and to undo some of the horrors that have been done. Because anybody who's been paying attention understands that this nation has drifted so far from the founders' vision. And like you said, it's a lot of the people that we elected. We tried to get them elected. These are good people, but even they couldn't do anything about it.
A great example of not being able to do something about it, Ronald Reagan, the great conservative icon, goes to Washington, D.C., promises to shrink government, puts Bennett in as Secretary of Education. His job is to do away with the Department of Education. And when he leaves, it's bigger than when he went to Washington. And the beast is just too big to slay from within.
And that's under Reagan, who really got this. I mean, Reagan got this better than anybody, way better than Trump. And I can't think of anybody who got this idea better than Reagan. And even under him, it was difficult. So the Convention of States has the ability. How many states? I mean, you said we need 34 out of the 50.
Right. That's 2/3 is what's specified in the Constitution
to do this. And then once they, if this were to happen, which I pray that it will, how many states are necessary to make amendments to the Constitution?
So the process is they gather in convention, they debate, they propose, and eventually if they can get 26 states to agree, those amendments then go out for ratification. They become suggestions only. Right. So this is important. The convention itself has no power. All they can do is propose, make suggestions. It takes 38 states to ratify. So that's 3/4 is the number specified in the Constitution. Once you get to that 3/4 number, on average, that's about 18 months for our amendments.
Right.
Once you get to the 3/4, then it becomes part of the Constitution.
Well, where were you, a year ago with this, 2 years ago? In other words, how does this move along? How quickly do you suppose you can get where you need to go?
Yeah, COVID really slowed everything down. Obviously, like everything else, in 2020, the legislature's recessed. They just stopped working. In 21, they were catching up from COVID. This year, we've already passed 3 states, Nebraska, Wisconsin, West Virginia. And then as of last week, we passed the Senate in South Carolina. It has to go back to the House for concurrence. That'll be state number 19. So that'll make it 4 states this session. There's a lot of momentum.
There's a lot of momentum. I like to hear that. Mark Meckler, congratulations. Folks, please go to conventionofstates.com. This is one of those things. This is historic. Be a part of taking the country back, giving it back to we the people. Conventionofstates.com. Mark, thank you.
Thanks for having me. I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks were willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to conventionofstates.com and volunteer today.